If you've watched the series I put out on the torso, legs, and arms, and you should before watching this series, you know that I've argued much of the advice that you'll come across about posture is wrong. When it comes to the head and neck, it seems to me that there is almost nothing but wrong information out there. So we will have our work cut out for us to set our heads straight. F.M. Alexander's most famous words start with the idea of letting the neck be free so that the head can go forward and up. But what exactly does that mean? We'll get there, but first let's get acquainted with the neck and head. The neck covers the top 7 vertebrae of your spine. The vertebra just below the neck connects to the first rib, so the neck is essentially what is above your rib cage. The head covers the skull, which is made up of a number of bones. All of these bones are joined by synarthrodial joints, which are joints that don't move under normal conditions, except of course the mandible, which is the jawbone. But I wouldn't say that it's entirely true that the bones of the skull don't move. The shape of the skull and the relative position of, say, the maxilla bone, which is just above your mandible and makes up the area of the nose up to the eyes, can be changed a relevant and significant amount. It takes time, but the bones of the skull can be moved towards a better configuration. Just as someone's skull can become misshapen due to bad habits, it can be corrected by good use. The head connects to the neck by the atlas, the top vertebra, which is somewhat different in shape from the other vertebrae. The second vertebra, the axis, is also somewhat unique. The atlas and the axis have a greater range of motion than the rest of the vertebrae, which is why we can pivot our head quite a bit to look side to side. In the Alexander technique world today, it's very common to put a large emphasis on the head-neck relationship. However, in the initial Alexander technique, the torso is primary. The head and neck are not irrelevant, they're as relevant as every other part, but the torso is primary. So we will first look at the upper torso, as what's happening in the head and neck will be massively influenced by what's happening there. Let's look at a before and after picture of a so-called postural improvement. If we focus in on the upper torso, I think it would be hard to say something other than that the upper torso is leaning back. It certainly appears that this man has been told to pull his upper torso back to improve his posture. If we put a line at the front, we see that it too is leaning back. The head is basically over the rib cage, maybe you could say a little bit behind center. Now let's look at a picture of F.M. Alexander. We see something entirely different. We see no hollowing of the back, instead the lower back is flat. We also see a much more straight front, and the head is forward of the torso, not centered over the torso. Jando Masoero makes the note that Alexander clearly stated that he had a problem of retracting his head, of pulling his head back. That was one of the most notable aspects of Alexander's bad posture. It was one of the first clues he followed to understand his postural problems. This picture is obviously from later in his life, after he developed a system for correcting postural problems. So this is a man who had a problem of pulling his head back. But when we look at him, we see that his head is way forward of what you'd see in the average person. I don't think you can say this is an accident, or a matter of Alexander's personal anatomy. He developed a system that emphasized the idea of head forward and up, and we see him with his head forward and up relative to his torso. Some people note that he seems to have some kind of hump at his back. I'm talking about this sloping forward above his armpit. What is that? Upon further inspection, you will find that this hump, so to speak, is present in everyone. Let's return to our average person. If we simply rotate the picture, we see that he has this same round of the upper back, and we can make Alexander stand like this with a simple edit to rotate his upper end back and down. We can explain this shape fairly easily. This is the rib cage, that's what we're looking at, and the ribs get smaller as you go higher up the spine. The first ribs, the highest ribs, are very small compared to the lower ribs. So as you get towards the top of the rib cage, the spine at the back and the sternum at the front are going to get closer and closer together. That is what forms this rounding shape. So the question clearly is, how is your rib cage supposed to be oriented? Should it be straight at the front and back with a rounded top, or should it be angled at the front and back with the rounded portion pointing maybe 25 degrees back? If you've watched the series about the torso, you already know the answer to this question. But there's still something we need to reckon with. What's happening with the head? Should the head be over the torso, or in front of it? And if Alexander's posture is right, then what is forward head posture? The idea of forward head posture is probably the most well-known concept in the posture world. Most people that start to look at their posture come to believe they have forward head posture. So why would Alexander want our head to be forward like this? I'd like you to spend a little time observing people around you and yourself. What does your upper torso look like? What do other people around you look like? How does what I've said so far match up with what you see in reality? Then join me next episode and we'll start to make sense of the head and neck and this peculiar question of what is forward head posture.